Good morning and welcome to this week's podcast where I'm thrilled to be joined by Pastor Mark Wilson. Do people still call you Pastor?
Well, they call me Pastor Mark and they call me Professor Wilson. I'm still a pastor, just cleverly disguised as a professor.
Okay. You're a sheep in wolf's clothes or something like that, or a wolf in sheep's clothes. Well, I don't know what's appropriate nowadays. For those of you that don't know Pastor Mark, he spent the majority of his ministry in Wisconsin in a town called Hayward. Am I mistaken?
That's right. That's right. Way up at the top.
How many years were you up there?
26 years. Yeah, long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
26 years. And then in 2017, I believe you moved to South Carolina. Supposedly it was the Lord calling you. I'm pretty sure you were just trying to get out of shoveling snow.
Yeah, it sure seems like heaven in February and March after spending all that time up north. So yeah, I'm a senior in college now. This is my fourth. I'm just starting my fourth year.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Year. Yeah.
You
So I'm a
said
rookie.
it's heaven in February to be in South Carolina. Is it rough though in the summer months? Because I've been
it's horrible.
sweltering. Yeah.
But for the joy set before him, that's what I think about. Okay.
Looking unto Jesus.
That's right. November's coming. It will be.
I was introduced to you. I don't know if you know this or not. I didn't have a background in the Wesleyan Church, and I had a connection to Marlon Hodel, Dr. Hodel, and this was his home church, and they were in a transition period, and they asked me to come down and candidate, and I came and ended up becoming the pastor, and I got a hold of your book, Filled Up, Poured Out, and may talk about that a little bit in our conversation, but I was impressed by your spirit. I love the book. I'm not really sure how I found it. I don't know if did the Wesleyan Investment Foundation send that to the pastors? You know how they said this book?
No, it was just out there. Maybe you got it for one of those 5 cents in a back little sale kind of thing or something, guard sale. That's what it was.
I don't know why, and I shouldn't admit this in a podcast because it's almost like it's going to be incriminating me, but they send you the books once a year, and it's like, here's a blessing from us, here's a Stan Kohler book. I hate to admit this, but there's just so many books I want to read. I usually don't read them. I don't know how I picked yours up, where I got it, but it was one of the books that I read, and I devoured it. I read it from beginning to end, and I liked it so much, and this is true, I'm not blowing hot air, that the copy that I marked up and wrote in and highlighted, I think I gave to my dad. I know I gave him a copy, and ended up buying myself another one, but it was an outstanding book. And I don't know if I've ever had the chance to tell you that, but I appreciate that. It meant a lot to me.
I appreciate that. Yeah. That's been a few years since that book has been written. And,
yeah. Do you have some more books? And I'm talking about the one you wrote when you were 10 years old.
Yeah. I have two. I wrote Purple Fish. That was my second book. That one is on evangelism.
Okay, well, I will have to read it, and I look forward to doing so. I loved your heart and your spirit. As a way of helping my church people and myself really get to know you a little bit better, would you be willing to share maybe your testimony, how you came to faith, and then how God called you into ministry?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. My father was a pastor. His daddy was a bootlegger in Boozy Creek, Tennessee. Boozy Creek. So he ran moonshine. And it's amazing how God placed a school teacher who loved Jesus into my dad's life when he was just a little boy. He had never gone to church or Sunday school or anything like that. But this teacher loved him and took him under her wing when his mother died, giving birth to her 15th child. And so she brought little Andy to Sunday school, and God called him to be a preacher. And so he ended up going to God's Bible school and became a pastor. And then I was raised in a parsonage. And what an amazing thing. But yeah, there's no such thing as second generation Christianity, right? It has to be first generation. I had to find it on my own. Of course, I was raised in the faith, but there was a day, I'll never forget it, December 6th, 1990. I was actually a pastor by this point. I was a professional Christian. Um, but I realized there was something so deep that I needed. Um, I my faith was mostly exterior.
Mm.
I mean, it was a good kind of exterior, um, but when you just have a glaze of spirituality without the real deal going on the inside, it's not sufficient for the trials and the hardships of life. And and I was running into stuff and just really struggling. Went through a process, a spiritual journey, where it landed me at an altar at about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning at this church where I was a youth pastor. And I knelt at the altar there and I said, Lord, whatever you have that you can give to a person, as much of you as a human can possibly have, that's what I want. I
Mm.
want that. I need you. I need you. And I need all of you. And I want you to have all of me. And that day changed my life. The Spirit of God just flooded my soul, filled me up. I mean, there were people that I just couldn't stand going into that place, and it just God filled me up with love for them. There were worries and anxieties that I had about stuff, and I was all stewing and everything, and it all evaporated. It was just His presence was so sweet and so beautiful, and the Bible became a brand new book for me. And that very day, that same day, I led somebody to Christ. It was the first time in my life I had ever led anybody to Christ. Even though I'd been a youth pastor, I couldn't do it. I didn't know how to lead anybody to Jesus. So I would take them to events. So a speaker would preach and they'd come forward. So there were still people who had come to Christ under my ministry, but I didn't know how to do that. But I don't know. God just gave me that gift of evangelism that very day when He filled me up with His
Uh,
Spirit. I call it I don't know. I hate to label it, because as soon as you label it, call it the sanctification, whatever. Um, as soon as you label it, it sticks it in a box, and it sure didn't feel like a box to me.
mm.
It was the world, the whole universe. And as a direct result of that experience, um, I ended up sharing a testimony at a youth convention in Cincinnati. Just that happened about a month later. Tim Elmore, who was in charge of that part of the convention, I had shared my testimony, what God had done in my life, because I had seen this in him. And I said, Tim, let me tell you what Jesus did for me. And he says, well, you're coming to Cincinnati. You're going to share your testimony. We've been praying for a fresh testimony of what God has done in somebody's life when they just yield. And so I went. I ended up going to, I hadn't planned on it, but I ended up going to Cincinnati and shared my testimony. And the superintendent from Wisconsin was there. And he came up to me and he said, if God's calling you to be a pastor of a church somewhere, just give me a call. And I said, no, I'm not interested. I lived in California at that time. I didn't want to go to Wisconsin. That's like going to Siberia. And so I said, no, I'm not interested. But God began to stir my heart. He just began to stir my heart. And I knew there was something going on. And the same thing happened with Kathy, my wife. She was a school teacher. We were very busy. We had two little kids. Um, our lives were just 110 miles an hour. But God began to stir in her heart. And one day she's driving, she pulls off to the side of the road at the closest thing she could find to nature. It was in Southern California. You can't find nature. But she found it was a lot, just an empty lot with weeds. So she pulls off and she prays and says, God, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to do? And she had this picture. It was like a vision that came to her. And it was me being a pastor of a church, even though I had not said this to her, me being a pastor of a church, her staying home and not teaching, it's just her being a mom full time, us living close to nature somewhere, and us living in a parsonage. I mean, she just pictured, boom, just like that. And so she came home and she told me, she didn't know how I would respond to that. But God had been stirring my heart. And I said, I think we're supposed to check it out. There's this guy from Wisconsin. I remember at that conference that told me, give him a call. He said, what do you think? And she says, well, sure, let's give him a call. Let's see what he says. So I call him up and he says, well, it's amazing that you call me tonight. He said, in 20 minutes, there's this church board that's going to be meeting. It's a place called Hayward. And if you want it, I'll give him your name. No, I was thinking 20 minutes. I was thinking like 2 years from now.
Right.
When I get everything, all my ducks in a row. 20 minutes, heaven's sakes. So, well, I said, okay. And oh my goodness, it was incredible. The very next day, I lived in Southern California. So like we would take short-term mission trips into Mexico. And the very next day I was on a mission trip to Mexico. And I was at this orphanage in Mexico. And there was a pastor there from Holland who couldn't speak English. He hardly any. He spoke more English than I spoke Dutch, though. And here we meet each other at this orphanage in Mexico. And we just sort of do small talk. We can hardly communicate. And we start to walk away and he says, wait. And then in his broken English, he says, I must say something to you. And he points right at me, just like he says, God is going to call you into some very exciting places. Don't be afraid to go wherever it is that he calls you to go.
And that was how far apart from you talking to the district superintendent?
That was the next day.
Wow.
And I hadn't heard whether or not, I hadn't heard whether he had actually done that or not. But when I got home that night, there was a message on my answering machine from the vice chairman saying, hey, we want to give you, we'd like for you to talk to you. We're looking for a pastor.
Wow, that is incredible. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's incredible. So, well, thanks. This is my fun story. Anyway, he said, we'd like to talk to you next week and hear about your philosophy of ministry and blah, 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 blah. And we'd like just to explore some conversation with you. Now, I had a problem because I didn't have a philosophy of ministry. I hadn't really thought, I'm thinking like, uh-oh, no, they're going to want my philosophy of ministry. Lord, what do I do about that? and I was supposed to go to this breakfast. There was a church leaders breakfast that was a couple of days later, and I accidentally twisted my ankle, and I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. But so I actually called the guy in charge and told him I wasn't going to be able to make it, so give my reservation to somebody else or something. But they couldn't find anybody for my spot. But you know what happened, David? God healed my ankle. He healed my ankle. I remember I was praying, and then then my ankle was healed. I was able to walk on it. It was no problem. So I thought, I can still go to that breakfast. So God healed me, and just so I could get there to that breakfast. When I sat down at the breakfast, there was Bob Logan was the guy who was speaking, and he said, here's what he said. He said, I was going a different direction, but I think I'm going to do this instead. And he says, if I was a young pastor and I was just starting out, I'm going to tell you what my philosophy of ministry would be. And I was like,
you're like, hold a minute, let me get a paper and pen.
That's right. So my philosophy of ministry is Bob Logan's philosophy of ministry.
Yeah.
It was about inspiring worship services and meaningful small groups and a deep, passionate spirituality that gives you the energy to move forward, to have faith and instill faith in people, and always keep the outreach focus and really make young kids and young people a priority and stuff like that. And every one of those things is what I did. So I ended up going to Hayward. Well, they did the interview. They flew me out. Kathy she couldn't go. She was busy teaching. And so she says, yeah, we're going to Hayward, but you go ahead and go and do the interview and stuff, but I'll start packing. And I said, well, honey, they got to vote on me first. And
Yeah, it's a little out of order there.
yeah, so she says, yeah, but I know we're going. But I didn't have that kind of confidence. But when I went, I mean, I was a rookie. I was 29 years old. And I remember the day that I preached. It was a crummy sermon. It was crummy. I mean, it was. But there's a difference between a good sermon and a good message.
Hmm.
I mean, you can have a good sermon, but it's not a message. It's just rhetoric. But if you have a good message, that's what counts, because that's our job, right? We're messenger delivery. I'm the messenger boy, messenger men and women. That's our job. We're like the postal carrier. We're the Amazon carrier. We're not the box. Sometimes we get that mixed up. We think we're the box. Anyway, it was a crummy message, and then I left, and they voted on me, and they came to the parsonage where I was staying. Like, just all the people showed up. I mean, it was supposed to be just one, but everybody came. There were only 29 of them. There were 29 members, and they voted unanimously. Yes, they wanted this kid from California to come be their pastor.
And what they didn't know is they were really voting on Bob's philosophy of ministry in California.
That's right. That's what it was. It was, you know what it was? It wasn't that I was great. It wasn't. It was that God was great.
Yeah.
And that God, his favor was on it. And that he wanted this to happen. And we all knew it. I knew it. Kathy already knew it. She was already going. and they all knew it. After they voted, they cried and they hugged each other. They laughed. Because it's the first time in the history of the church they'd ever had a unanimous vote about anything. It was always, 16-13, stuff like that. And this one was 29-0. So no, they didn't have unanimous votes after that, but in this particular moment. And it was awesome. And so we just went in there and just started loving people. And there were a lot of times when I had to bail out the service. I felt like I did with the sermon. I don't know if you've ever had to do that or not. But like sometimes the things were so like, oh man, I remember one Sunday in particular, it was just awful. The music was horrible. We were droning and everybody was dying and we were groaning. The song leader, he's up front. And he got drafted, I mean, he wasn't there by his own volition. And so he was trying to wave his arm like this and sing. And he stops. He says, stop. He looks to the organist, just stop. Right in the middle of the song. And he says, he goes out to he looks at the people, he says, I'm dying up here. I'm just dying up here. And you guys aren't helping me out one bit. He says, we're going to sing that third verse one more time. And I'm going to be looking for lips moving. And if your lips are moving, you're up here with me. I'm sitting right behind him on the platform. And so
you're the proud captain of the ship, Pastor.
Oh man. I was like, oh no. Well, anyway, well, that was his last Sunday song meeting.
Wow.
But there were times where it felt like the ball was on the 1 yard line by the time I got up to preach, and I had to go 99 yards for the touchdown. And I usually didn't make it to the 50, but
right.
We tried, right? But God was good. He was gracious to us. And there were a couple of things that I found that were really important in those early days. I wrote a note to myself and I taped it on my desk. And it said, if you go, they will come. Now, I don't mean like if I leave the church, they're going to come back, although that's probably true. But no, if I get out to where they are, they're going to come to where I am.
Hmm.
If I can go out to their lives and get into their life, then they'll come in and join my life and my life with Jesus. And so I just started doing that, like going out most every day into the community and just looking for people that maybe were wayward, that had lost their way, that just needed some encouragement and some love. And my job was just to bless and encourage people. I mean, I didn't go out there to try to convert them at that time. I went out just to bless and encourage them.
Hmm.
And that takes the pressure off. I think sometimes people go out try to do evangelism, they make it too I don't know, intense, too confrontational, and people on the receiving end of that, they don't like it, and the people on the giving end don't like it either. It's like Becky Pippert says,
Everyone's miserable.
yeah, everybody's miserable. Yeah, both Christians and non-Christians alike, they are uptight about evangelism, right? But if you bless and encourage people and just love them where they are, I mean, God begins to open up the doors, and that's what happened. And things just started popping. Like people started coming, and then they got saved, and then we baptized them, and then some of them. There were two of those. There were early converts that joined my staff later on. They became pastors,
Hmm.
part of the church. One person that we thought was. I thought was an atheist first time I had met her, and she ended up becoming a pastor. And I mean, it's just pretty cool over the years. So when you've been with people for a long time, um, you get to see these miracles that, like when you walk with God and you help people walk with God over a long period of time. I mean, you have to have stories. I mean, they just emerge out of
Yeah.
this. And it's just been a beautiful thing. We loved Hayward. We ended up baptizing over 600 people. Um, but it was time to go though. When it was time to go, it was time to go. It's 2017, and it was time. And that was probably the hardest decision I ever made in my life, to leave the
Hmm.
church that I loved and the community. See, I wasn't just the pastor of the church. I saw myself as the pastor of the whole community. Um, and I still love that place. I still love the people, and I love the town. Um, but God called me here. And so I say that to the students. I say, "Oh, you guys, you better go out and be faithful disciple multipliers, because I've given up a whole lot for you. So you gotta understand this. This is a lot's riding on you," is what I say to those guys, because it is true. It's really true. I'm grateful that Chad McCallum is the pastor there now, and he's awesome. And he's been such a good friend and supporter of me, and I'm his number one fan. So we get along great. It's been neat to be welcomed back. So I'm allowed to come back anytime I want, and they just bless me when I come back, and
That's
that's what.
awesome. I should have. I have it in my notes and I didn't say it, but you're serving at Southern Wesleyan University right now down there in Pickens. Actually, is it in Pickens? Is that the city it's in?
Yeah, Central is the name of the
Central.
town.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
I
the
have a
central spot between Atlanta and Charlotte. So it was like a central station is where we were, Grand Central Station.
well, I have a step. All my biological grandparents have gone to heaven, but I have a step grandmother who lives in Pickens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Do you
Liberty.
ever come down? Do you ever come down to visit?
I do not like I should. I haven't been down in a couple years.
Well, come on
Um,
down. Come on down. And when you come, then
oh, she's
we'll
an awesome woman. I need to go see her. She married my grandfather, and then my biological grandfather died when I was like 10 or 11.
okay, yeah.
And so all my memories of her were pretty young and stuff, but awesome woman. But you kind of beat me to the punch. One of the things I wanted to explore a little bit with the COVID and stuff, I was going to kind of set it up by saying I'm sure that when you went to Hayward, it was nothing but sunshine and butterflies and rainbows and good times. Because just to joke a little bit, because I think that a lot of us subconsciously have this idea that when we serve God, everything's going to go well. And I'm so thankful that God does work things out. I want to talk and celebrate some of the stories from your ministry, how God came through and helped. But in your book, when I read it years ago, and I want to reread it, but Filled Up, Poured Out, you were very candid about some of the struggles that you went through as well, and some of the burnout and things like that. And I guess it's just sort of, I usually don't go here in podcasts, but I guess just because of the times that we're facing and trying to keep my fingers on the pulse of the church, I've got some people that are really hurting. And I guess I just thought it might be healthy, because I would look at your ministry. I think most people would look at your ministry at Hayward and say, you know what, God really used Pastor Mark. And yet, if you were being honest and objective, like you were in your book, there were the blessings and there were also the trials. And, it wasn't always a bed of roses. It wasn't always. And so I just didn't know if you could maybe share a story or two of maybe a season that you had to go through in ministry that was difficult, but then maybe even explain how God used that ministry to shape and form your character a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. I mean, when I look back over 26, I can see the joys of it now. I mean, I look back and I see, oh, it was good. Those are good days. And they were. I mean, but it doesn't mean that all those days were good. there, were,
Right.
there were a lot of ups and downs. There were a lot of really hard things. Like when the oldest members of my church were murdered in their home. And I had been sort of I'd been running on fumes spiritually at that point for a little while. Ministry has a way of doing that. When you have lots of things going, you say, okay, well, next week I'll fill up my tank. And then, but what happened was I was counting on next week to fill up my tank. And then at the end of the week, they're murdered in their home by this young kid who he was trying to be a gang member or something. And he kills them. And their whole life centered around our church. Their best friends, their family, everything was our church. And so I became like a spokesman for the family with the news and stuff like that. They asked me to do all that. And at their funeral, it was hard. And what I found was when I went into pastor mode. I went into this. Well, you know what pastor mode is. You know what I'm talking about.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I plead the fifth.
Yeah, and so I was doing the funeral and doing the stuff, but I really didn't take time to process that appropriately. And it was about a month later, it really caught up with me. And I just lost my passion, my drive to move forward. I was just under a cloud. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever gone through in my life. Just this cloud. And just the littlest things, it required enormous energy. And I had to go speak somewhere. I had to go out of town and speak at some rural pastor's thing. And I didn't want to do it, but I was stuck. I'd been obligated. So I had 4 hours to get there. So I drove 4 hours and I gave a crummy talk. And as I didn't, and all you have is sludge at the bottom of the tank. That's all you have to give, right?
That's all you have to give.
So I was giving them sludge. Then they all said, nice sludge. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, on the way home, I stopped at a gas station to get gas, and I noticed that at the cash register, there was a newspaper there, and it said, mega church pastor admits infidelity, asked to resign. And I knew this guy. I had met him. And there he was on the front page of the Minneapolis newspaper. And it was like, oh, wow, what happened? I mean, it was the largest church in the area. They had just gone through a multi-million-dollar building project. And then he crashes and burns. Ended up selling used cars. And it just floored me when I saw that. So I bought the newspaper and I read the whole article in my car. And while I'm reading the article, the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, "This is what happens to pastors who neglect their souls."
Wow.
And I thought, I don't want to neglect my soul. I feel right now like my soul is just, I'm on a sludge. I can't keep living like this. I've got to do something different. Like I have to build new patterns into my life so that I'll have enough reserve spiritually and emotionally that will be able to face whatever comes. And so God took those next 4 hours as I'm driving home. He used that as a school for me. It was like a little sanctuary in my car, and he taught me new things that day about my prayer patterns. Pretty much, that was the biggest thing was my prayer pattern. Like I would seek the face of God, but I usually would seek it in spurts. So like I needed to know how to seek the face of God before I sought the face of people. And that was a new thing for me. And so that day changed. I mean, that day I made a commitment. I'm going to seek God's face before I seek people's face. And with his help, I mean, that was 2002. It's been 18 years and it's been that way for me every day. And it just changed the way I pray and the way I think. I also realized that I'd been going, well, probably about 20 miles an hour faster than I should have. I was breaking the speed limit in my life. And so there were certain things, like I would do back to back to back to back to back meetings. And God showed me in the car, I couldn't do that I needed a recovery when I'm with somebody to do my next meeting. Because if I don't have that recovery, then I'm not a healthy person by the end of the day. And so that sustained me. I think it really helped. That's what kept me in Hayward for 26 years. I
Wow.
think, and that I'm here doing this today. I mean, like, it all goes back to the sanctuary experience. And that one, the sanctuary thing, that I was going through a valley before I got to that altar experience. And then this other one's a valley that took me to this changing my priorities around. So maybe that's the way God works. Like he takes us to a valley to get us to a mountaintop. Maybe that's the way it works.
I was actually, it was this morning in devotions. I was reading Psalm. Here, I'm going to show. I don't remember anything. I think it was Psalm 87. But anyways, I was reading God's word, and I've never heard this preached, and it's probably not as profound as it was when you discover it. You feel like you're Columbus, But I was sitting there, and basically God was frustrated with Israel and Judah because he had performed all the miracles for them, delivering them from Egypt, the Red Sea. And in the psalm, it was a long psalm, they were recounting all of the miracles of God. And it said basically, but the people, their hearts were hard and they turned the other way. And God grew angry, his wrath was full towards them and whatnot. And I was reading it and I had this thought, and I don't know, maybe you can tell me that, I should have had this at birth and I'm just now coming around. But that, like, the people of Israel hated the desert wandering, and probably rightfully so, because they were looking to get into the promised land. And yet it occurred to me that I'm not sure that any generation of Israelites experienced as many miracles in their lifetime as those people that died in the desert.
Oh, wow. I had never thought about that.
Well, I hadn't either. And I thought, because there was the time, and the other thing I thought is they sat under the greatest leader Israel ever had in the desert. And, like at the foot of the mountain when God was going to come to the people, and then God was going to apparently, and I don't know what it looked like exactly, but reveal some measure of himself to the people. And they were afraid and terrified, and they begged Moses, you intercede, you talk to God, we can't take it. But I thought, how many times in my life do I get fixated on the promised land and I despise the desert wanderings? And yet oftentimes the desert wanderings are the times in my life when God reveals himself in the most powerful, tangible ways. And
Wow.
the challenge for me is, with this COVID, and I get it, I'm there too, but I have all these people around me in life who are just, I want out, I want out, I want out. And I guess I've been praying, God, help me not to try to want out, but help me to use this time to seek you, because if I draw closer to God through this, then this could be one of the greatest blessings I've had in my life. And I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna. People get tired of the guy that's always like, well, could be worse. It's like, oh, be quiet, Pastor.
Yeah.
I don't want to be an irritant, but I guess I just read that and I thought, I would rather have lived in the promised land, but I probably could have grown the most in the desert. And again, I'm starting to get a little cliche, but I don't know. Have you thought of that before?
Oh,
I'm just really
not like that. No, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's the wilderness is the place where we see him. Maybe it's because we need him. We know we
Yeah.
need him.
Hmm.
Like, so he provides manna for us. He provides water out of rocks, out of hard places. Then the water comes. Um, yeah, we maybe we become desperate for him when we're in the hard spot.
Hmm.
So when I left Hayward, I got to tell you this. Well, first, I want to say something else about that. I'm 3 years out now. Well, coming on, I'm just beginning now my 4th year away. And there are things about pastoring that I look at now, I see now, that I didn't see when I was in the thick of it.
Hmm.
And I want to share a couple of those things.
Yeah. Fire.
Like, one of those is, as I think back about my most meaningful ministry moments. It's not not one Easter Sunday showed up on my most meaningful ministry moments list, even though I'm grateful for Easter. I loved Easter. That was my favorite Sunday of the year. But that's not it. My most meaningful ministry moments were pretty much all either one-on-one or in a very small group context. And what that says, I think, is that our most significant ministry happens in the small places. It happens in the small moment, in the moments that we don't even know we're doing our most significant ministry when we're in the middle of doing it.
Hmm.
So like when you're visiting somebody in a nursing home, or you're walking the hallway of the hospital and you're going in to visit somebody who's sick or something like that. I mean, I never even had a clue at that time when I'm doing it, that I am now performing one of my most significant ministry moments. I just did it because I had to do it. Well, Gladys is in the hospital. I got to go see her. And yet, as I look back on it, that's really it. That's really it.
Hmm.
Another thing I think, as I look back on it, I think sometimes I expected things out of people that how do I say this? I don't even know how to say it, except for I guess what I'm trying. I don't even know how to say it, but except for, like, there are some awesome people who may not jump through all our hoops the way that we would like for them to, but that doesn't mean they don't love God, and they're not trying to walk with him and stuff like that, even if they didn't come to my small group or they didn't volunteer for Vacation Bible School, or even if they didn't make a faith promise missions pledge. You know there might be other stuff that they're doing that's probably even better than the person that did all those other things. And as a pastor, I looked at that and said, oh, now that's a good church member right there. Oh, you're coming over here. But as I look back, because now I'm in the pew, and I'm thinking, oh, there's more to it. There's just God's God's crayon box is not like the kind the little kids get in a restaurant with 3 crayons in it. I mean, like, his crayon box is great big, and he gives lots of colors in this thing, so to give people freedom, I think, to be who they are, without squeezing them into little boxes of who we think they should be.
Mm.
Um, I think that's part of it. Now, I'm not saying don't challenge people. I think it's important to challenge. All of us need a good challenge. Um, but that's one thing. If I went back and did it all over again, I would. I think I would be a little more gracious that way with people
Mm.
who are just, the farmer and the the clerk. I've valued. I think sometimes leaders and and pastors. So God gave me a calling for pastors. Um, but the farmers and the clerks are just as important in God's economy as the pastors and the leaders.
Mm.
So I guess that. Wait a minute. Last thing, my like I said, the last few months before I left, I just, like I said, that was the hardest thing that I ever did. And where I came to that was I went on a vision retreat. And every year I would do this a couple of times a year, but once a year in particular, I would be seeking God's vision for the next chapter in our life. And I'd go away on a prayer thing, and like 2 or 3 days, I'd be holed up in a cabin somewhere and visioning and praying and writing and journaling and all that stuff. And I went on this vision retreat. And for 3 days, I was waiting for the vision from God, and He didn't give it to me. And as I'm driving home, because I had nothing, and I was frustrated. I said, God, why didn't you give me a vision? Why didn't you give it to me? Every other year for 25 years, it worked great. And now this year it didn't happen. And I sensed that He said to me, why would I give a vision to the person who's not going to carry it out? That the vision is somebody else's vision, and it isn't yours. Oh man, I every mile
That
heading
must have
home.
broke your heart. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I got home and Kathy says, "How was your retreat, honey?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah." And she goes, "You need to go pray again." And I told her. I mean, that was it. That
You're like
weekend was.
you're an emotional wreck, and your wife's like, get back in the car and go back.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, that was it. I knew
So
that.
had God been showing her though as well, or was it just when you talked to her it resonated with her, or was it hard maybe even for her to accept
No,
it?
no. At that point, not really. No, I mean, no. Well, she could see something was stirring, but she didn't. It wasn't like when we moved to here, where she wasn't packing her boxes or anything like that. Um,
She did that 10 other times she wanted to leave, probably.
oh yeah, no, it was hard. I mean, that was hard for her to leave.
Yeah.
But as I look at it though, when I see what I can do now, I mean, I have this group of preachers. I'm teaching them how to preach,
Mm.
and they're going to go preach. They're going to go bring the word of God. They're going to multiply. So it isn't just me in doing my ministry. It's a little bit of me going to all these different people, and then they're going to take it out, and then they're going to multiply. And so I just kind of think of it as spreading seeds that are good. It's going to grow like a whole orchard, and not just one apple tree, but a whole orchard. That's what I'm counting on.
Mm.
So I'm praying for them that they'll be strong and they'll carry on the legacy.
You know, I feel like I understand in a very small way. I did a youth camp this summer, and because of COVID, they had to drop the numbers way down, and they called it like a VIP experience and whatnot. And we get to the camp, and there's more counselors than there are, campers. And these were kids that were planning on going to ministry. It was at the Bible college my dad works at, and it was interesting. Like I just had this awareness that while I was preaching, it was for the students that were training for ministry and not the campers. I mean, like it was for both, and the Holy Spirit would use it. And there was just this deep satisfaction. And I'm not called to that area of work. I don't want my church people to hear this. Pastor's leaving us. But I don't know. Just while I was preaching, I was like, in a local church setting, I impact lives that hopefully impact other lives. So there's a multiplying, effect. But if you can invest in somebody who can then go invest in others, there's just, I mean, it's to the power of 2 or 3. You know what I mean? It was something really satisfying about that. And so I imagine you pouring into the future pastors and stuff. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that very rewarding.
Mm.
But I miss being a pastor though. Every day I miss that. There's not a day that goes by that I don't, but that's good. I mean, I think that's a good thing. Let's say if I hated it and I could hardly wait to get out of there, would you want me to be teaching people how to be a pastor?
Right. I hear you. And you know, there have been moments of restlessness in ministry where it's like, oh, if I just, only I sold cars, and I mean, pastors, God checks me, the Holy Spirit checks me, if I have a pity party, and it doesn't last very long. But I've learned if I'm discontented in my spirit, I can't trust anything I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Like, you know what I mean?
yeah.
That is not the time to be doing inventory or a wellness checkup or anything like that. So it's pretty neat that like you loved pastoring and you felt God calling you. In my mind, that's got to be God, because you wouldn't leave something you love and the people you love unless it was a God thing,
Yeah,
But
no, that's true.
hey, I wanted the premise of your book, and I feel like I'm about to mutilate your book because it's been years since I've read it, and I went back and reread a little bit, and I just can't put a book in one sentence. But the title, Filled Up, Poured Out, I mean, it does have to do with we grow empty and the way that we overcome it or whatever. I think that I find sometimes myself, I want God to change my circumstances to make life easier. He doesn't want to take away my pain. He wants to give me more grace. Is that,
Yeah.
I mean, how would you summarize your book? Is that, like you talked about, kind of going back to the well, or like you talked about the sponge. I don't want you to share that illustration because I'm going to use it someday about the sponge being hard until you dip it in the water. Skating on marbles, like kind of, we need to get back to being grounded in God and drinking deeply from the well so that we can be poured out. Is that kind of an accurate summation of your book? I feel bad because it's been years since I read it.
No, you're right. Well, hey, it's been a long time since I wrote it, so I can't remember. Are you kidding?
By the time you did manuscripts, you're probably so sick of it you haven't read it.
In fact, one time I was kind of discouraged about something, and I was like, "Oh man, this is hard. I don't know what to do." And Kathy says, I've got a good book for you. And she went to pull it up again. So, oh yeah, that's right.
I'm never writing a book if my wife does that to me. But
yeah, but that's it. You have to have, if you're gonna have something worthwhile to give somebody else, you got to have it inside first, and that's the bottom line. And so, like, if you're gonna be filled with His peace, for instance, like if you want to be a peacemaker to give peace to others, then you got to have peace in your own heart. If you're going to give the presence of God to others, be a presence to Him to others, then you need to walk in His presence yourself. So that's, so the first half of the book is just about filling up, and then the second half is just about how those things work when you're pouring it out. And so that's kind of the idea. And for me, I found that in those earlier days, ministry was about pouring out, and then I would be I'd be like just dehydrated, and I need, so okay, now pour out. But there's a different pattern, right? I mean, it's sort of like the Jewish pattern. I was teaching this in my Old Testament survey class. There was evening and morning the first day, evening and morning the second day, that the Jewish day begins in the evening. It begins out of rest, and then out of this rest comes then a day's worth of work. You start with rest, and then you work.
I have never thought of that before. Wow.
Yeah, instead of work, crash, work, crash. And so that's the same idea of filled up, poured out. You rest in His grace. There's a Sabbath rest for the people of God. We live in that. And then we pour it out, right? And then we come back and replenish and pour it out. And so I think that's a much healthier pattern.
I was going to ask you, and you've kind of already beat me to the punch a little bit, saying that your wife said this to you, But do you still have to guard against burnout? I probably know the answer, but I guess I don't know. I think sometimes I wrestle with things, and then the fact that I'm wrestling with it 3 years later, I mean, I give it to God. God gives me grace. I learn my lessons, and then I find myself further down the road dealing with the same thing. It can almost be discouraging a little bit. I thought that might be kind of neat to hear from Pastor Mark. You wrote this book on not being burned out. Do you ever find
Yeah, I need to read it. Yeah,
yeah.
no, yeah. I mean, because we're human beings.
Mm,
I think that one thing that helps for me, when you get older, you become more self-aware, and so then, like, we become more aware of when we need more replenishment. Maybe like I was not even aware that I needed the replenishment as desperately as I did until I was in the car with that newspaper. I didn't, I wasn't even aware of it. I was young. I didn't know. I just didn't know. Um, and sometimes we can be depleted and not know. Um, but I think that probably there are weariness times and stressful times and things that feel, there's a difference between stress and burnout too. Stress is just the pressure that you feel, daily pressure. And burnout is when it feel like you're not going to make any difference no matter what. And it's just forever, as far as you can see, nothing. I've not been prone to burnout as much. Only 2 or 3 times in my life I've felt that in a pretty significant way. But stress, yeah, I mean that's something I have to fight all the time. Um, Again, there are certain patterns though that we can do to help alleviate the stress. So, like, if it's like taking a walk in nature, if that's part of your spiritual love language, um, or walking with God early in the morning or something like that, or whatever it is that gives breathing space for the soul. That's I think that's the remedy, for dealing with stress. It isn't like let's say that you're being flooded over with stress. You can either turn off the spigot or get a larger vessel to put it in. Those are the only options, or otherwise you're swamped with stress. Um, and the turning off the spigot, you can do that a little bit. Like, say if you're overcommit, I've tended sometimes to overcommit, and then I create stress for myself, and then it's like I just need to turn that off a little bit, um, or slow it down just a little bit. But the other side of it is probably better, because if we can expand our capacity for it, then it's not stress. So, like, the first time I ever drove, I was on a country road, no cars were passing by, and I was white knuckling, like, I mean, and the first time I ever drove in a city, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I mean, it was horrible. I was a country boy, and I drive in Chicago. It was awful. But I drive in Chicago now. It's no big deal. I don't feel stressed about that. Well, at least not too much. Um, and it's because my capacity of driving increased. And I think that that's the way it is in life with our spiritual, emotional well-being. Like, we can expand that through certain practices and stuff, things that expand our imagination, our souls, that expand our peace. And then when the stress comes, it's still there, but we can handle it.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I was just thinking about this talk today, and I just jotted down. We usually think the biggest problems are without, when the biggest challenges are usually within. Meaning, kind of to your point, we think if we could just change all of the circumstances, then we would be, and usually it's God wanting to develop character in ourselves to withstand the trials that we go through, or the character to lead that He wants and stuff. So I don't know. I'm kind of processing it verbally, but I really appreciate that. I'm going to pull something out of his book because I thought this was really good. I think usually when I start to sense burnout, I don't know that I've ever had strong burnout. I've gotten discouraged. I've gone through seasons of discouragement, but usually there's something causing it. that's not God. It's something within David. And in your book, you talked about 6, I don't know if you called them reasons for burnout or something like that, but I'm just going to read through these and you can tell me, because I think that these apply for parishioners too, right? These are the things that often lead. You said when responsibilities exceed energy. I'm not quoting heresy. This did come from your book, right? You're looking at me
Yeah.
like,
Who said that? What? No, I remember
yeah,
that.
it's like, that wasn't my book. It's like, oops, wrong book. You said burnout, or like, this stress, things like that, is when responsibilities exceed energy, when pretensions exceed realities. And you kind of hit on that a minute ago, when you expect things from people and you have these lofty ideals and people aren't meeting them. When pleasing exceeds shepherding, that's the one that convicts me sometimes. When outflow exceeds inflow, when serving exceeds loving, that's another one, that I think I'm doing my people justice because I'm working hard or I'm doing things for them, but I've lost the love for it. Then the 6th one you gave is when duty exceeds delight.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a phenomenal thing, because usually in my life, when something's wrong, it's usually David. And if David will get alone and pray, the Holy Spirit will show me. Often one of these 6 things is a little bit out of kilter, where I'm becoming a people pleaser, or I've put too many things on my plate, or I have too high of expectations of people. So I don't know. That was really helpful, even way back when I read it and I was freshening up, and I thought, I'm going to tell him this. And I don't want to share it because I think it'd be really helpful for my people too. Now, you got those out of the book. Those aren't personal experience in your life, surely.
Yeah, no, I write all of those from personal experiences. I've done every one of things. Thank you for the reminder too, because sometimes we do get into the duty of things. And when we can find the delight in it, because I think I remember writing about that, the snow, like when I looked out the window up in Wisconsin, and there was like 2 feet of snow outside. Oh no, 2 feet of snow shoveling. And my kids, when they saw, hey, 2 feet of snow, snowmen.
Right.
Well, same snow, just different perspective, right? And so if we can figure out ways to make snow angels out of the snow that comes our way, or whatever, like looking for the joy in the experiences, no matter what it is.
Hey, I find this, it's going long. I'm loving it. I'm really loving it. But I know you've got time constraints and stuff. I meant to get to this sooner, but could you share just kind of a story or two of how God answered prayer in Hayward, and just kind of, I don't know, just encourage my people. I love hearing stories. I'm a very social person.
Yeah.
I hate to change gears on you. I feel like I'm going from 5th gear to reverse right now.
No, that's okay. No problem. And yeah, I'll have to in about a minute. I got to run out here, but
Go for it.
Wow, there's just so many. I mean, God is over and over and over again. He's blessed our lives. We've seen him at work, and Kathy and I were just recounting story after story after story. Just the other day, we were taking a drive together. Remember that? Remember that? Remember how God did that? Remember how He provided there? And it's too many to even enumerate.
Mm-hmm.
He loves his children, and he pours out blessings to us. Sometimes we don't even realize that he's blessing us when we are being blessed. But we've seen it over and over. Like, I remember one time we took a huge financial risk at our board meeting. And I didn't know how we were going to do this. I mean, it was a big step financially that we threw our head over the wall. And it was like, oh boy, what have we done? I don't know if you've ever had a oh boy moment after a board meeting or not. So what did we do? Because if this doesn't work, I mean, I'm the guy that's going to be hanging out to dry here. But we all thought it was God's will. And, the very next day, a guy walks into my office and he made a contribution that was like half of what the issue was right there, just boom, just like that. And it was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe that he'd do that. He didn't know, but God did. And so God just provided. And what it said to me was we can trust him. If God's leading us to do something, we can trust him. If he gives a vision, he's going to put a pro in front of it, provision for the vision. He's going to take care of that. We've seen it time and time again. God has never failed us. I mean, we've had times where it was really tight financially, really tight. And there were times where I had a treasurer, I remember, he poor guy, we probably gave him high blood pressure and everything because, I mean, how is this going to be? No, you got But God always took care of it. I mean, every single step of the way. Like I never once in all those years did God fail us. And so I can really rest in that. Like if he's never failed me yet, he's not going to start failing me now. And so I can live into that promise the way that he's taking care of things. I mean, just over and over and over again. Oh man, I mean, they're just I could go all day telling stories.
I'll tell you what,
but
I'm putting you on the spot. I feel like we spent the majority of the time talking about dealing with like letting God grow us in difficult seasons, and I really appreciate that. I know you're a busy guy. I'm not trying to obligate you. I feel like this is probably not a professional thing to do. Would like maybe like 3-4 months down the road or something, like, would you be willing to do another one and maybe just share some of the miracles from
I'd be happy to do that.
I feel like it's almost like two things going on, and I'm trying to shove it in, but the timing's not right. What if we just kind of table it and then come back to it and maybe get you back sometime into a part two and just kind of share a couple of the miracles from Hayward? Is that okay if we did something like that?
I would love it. Hey, maybe I'll have some new miracles by the time we talk, right?
There you go. Amen.
God's mercies are renewed every day. It isn't old stuff. It's present and new, right?
Hey, let me do a 30-second prayer and then I'll say goodbye. Is that okay?
All right. Sure.
Father, thank you for Pastor Mark taking the time to bless us. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. It's ministered to me. And I pray that you'd help him there at SWU as he continues to pour into young lives. God, would you make it up to him? And would it be rewarding? Would it be fulfilling? Would he see some fruit from his labors? I pray. And bless him this day for the kindness that he's shown me in our church. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. God bless you, brother.
Thank you so much. Love you. Bye, dude.
Hey, all right. You've been awesome. Thanks.